We're live.
Interesting.
Hey, Jess.
Hey, Chad. Good to be
We
hanging out
weren't
with you
just
today.
sitting here talking. Yeah, so
Sure.
we have to say hello because we weren't just sitting here already talking to each other.
Yes, of course.
So
Yeah.
what are we going to do today, Jess?
Well, so you and I have you introduced me to this company called DXOS several months ago, which I still owe you like a beer in person for something for that introduction. So I've been working on it for several months now, and I thought we thought it might be fun to do some pairing on that, but also kind of show where we're at with DXOS and like why we're excited about it, why I'm excited about working on it. And yeah, well, I think we'll probably get to actually building something, and we'll see how that goes. We're going to be working in the rough edges of the grass, so we'll see. We might stumble over some stuff on the way, but that's awesome. That can be fun too.
Cool. I have, and this isn't just like YouTube content creator speak, but I have been excited to do this live stream for literally years.
Hear, hear.
Actually, this really is one though. So I'm an investor now somehow, and one of the worst things about being an investor is you invest in these teams and you get to know them and you get to know their tech and you get excited about it and you wish you could just work on it all the time, but you can't because it's a bunch of different teams and technologies.
Yeah.
But you're not supposed to have favorites, but this is the one that is like the quintessential example of one that I would just like to work on all the time. Every time I see demos of this thing, I just get so excited. And I think you reacted the same way when you met them. So let us dig in and show people why we're excited.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, this has definitely been it was interesting. The tiny snippet of that story there is that I was looking for something and working on things that were DXOS shaped. I told Chad about it, and Chad said, "You've got to talk to these guys." And I think it was maybe 90 seconds into the first meeting where they were showing me the demo. I said, "Whoa, whoa, 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 stop. How far are you? I know what you're doing, and I know how hard that is. Like, is this commercial? Like, where are we? Like, life cycle of the company, who's actually using it? What?" And I was so stunned to see it like in existence. So it's been a thrill to work on it, and hopefully we'll get to capture some of that thrill today. All right, so let me see if I can.
You want me to add your? Yeah, I can add it if you're ready.
Yeah, sure. Yep, go for it.
All right,
share the screen. And I have to, here we say open system settings. I may have to come back. We'll see. Systems permissions with browser. You know how that goes.
Yep.
This is one of the ones you have to quit and reopen. Yep. I'll be back in a few.
All right. The one time we don't go ahead and test sharing the screen before we start. So while Jess reloads, DXOS.org is the URL for the project. I'll put it up on a banner here. There is Jess.
All right. I really am back. And present my screen, and hopefully it'll let me this time. Share screen. We're going to do an entire screen. We'll do that one. And then keep that guy over there. All right. Are you seeing it today? Okay. Cool. Well, DXOS is a platform for creating these shared collaborative applications that are peer-to-peer and have a lot of other fun properties that I'm going to basically like slow reveal over the course of this demo. But since DXOS is in some ways a JavaScript framework, we have to start a demo in the place where all JavaScript framework demos start, which is with the to-do list application. So this is a pretty standard to-do list. There's nothing fancy about it. Take out the trash, get some groceries. I actually do need to feed my chickens today. And
you have chickens.
I have 8 chickens, and they've been out of food for at least 24 hours, so they're very hungry. But I have food for them. It's just in my van. I need to go put it in their thing. So yeah, one of the things I mean, if you've seen demos like this before, there's not a lot to notice other than the fact that it's fairly responsive. Like there's no loading spinners when I check things off. When I delete something, it goes away immediately. And the reason for that is that the data is being written locally to the local file system as opposed to some remote database where we're having some timeout, some loop where it's going through and updating that local database. And so I'll show you the code in just a minute, but there's no like optimistic updating happening. This is like directly update the local database. The other nice thing about that is that I can actually close this tab and reopen it, and the data is still there. And that's because it's not in memory. This is actually being written to the local file system IndexedDB. And so it's saved there. If I quit the browser, come back, it's still there. Don't clear all of your data and cookies and everything because that'll cause you problems, but it's there in IndexedDB for now. We can talk about how we get around that later. So the other nice thing about this way DXOS works is that you can actually share across tabs as well. So because the data is stored locally, oh, right, won't let me make one unless I make a new window. That's fine. Now I've got two tabs, same thing, they update together, yay, and it's fast because we're both reading from the same local system for these two tabs. But one of the place where things start to get interesting is that you can actually share across devices as well. So what I'll do is I'm going to open a new profile on the right. That's the equivalent of having a new device. Like I guess I could share the screen from my iPhone or from my iPad or from another Mac here, and you could see both devices. But if you're familiar with the way Chrome profiles work, Arc profiles work the same way. They're completely isolated from one another, have their own separate cookies, data store, all that kind of stuff. So this thing on the right doesn't know anything about any of the data that's on the left. So if I open up the Tasks app, it's gonna hit me with this file of this screen saying you need to create an identity. I don't know who you are, so I'll explain that in just a second. But I'm gonna go up here first and click Invite. When I click Invite, I can copy this link and I go back over to this brand new device that we're trying to sync with and paste that invite link in. Brings me back to the Create Identity page. And what this is saying is basically you need to tell me who you are. So we'll start with like a name, Jess Tester 2. And then it is creating a private key for this device that's going to be used to encrypt all of the data that is both transmitted between devices, so encrypted over the wire, and then eventually we'll start encrypting that data at rest. Right now it's unencrypted in IndexedDB, but it's literally something we could turn on when we're ready to. So I'm going to go through that code, and then you get like this typical like two-factor auth thing, right? Of like, okay, I've got a PIN code that I need to exchange across both 786, 769. And now I should see, hopefully, the demo gods are favoring us. There we go. Cool. So the data, what you saw for that little blink was the data replicating across these two devices. And so now they're in sync. And once they're in sync, it's really fast. Catching up sometimes can be slow because you are playing back all the previous events. We're going to talk about like the data model a little bit. But they're very, very fast in sync. I mean, I could be typing on either side and you can see how quick it is. So what's powering that is that it's not just storing in IndexedDB. It's actually taking the data in the browser's local store and then replicating that across devices through a synchronization layer. Any questions about that before I?
Is it doing it peer-to-peer, like using WebRTC or something?
I'm glad you asked. It is doing it peer-to-peer. And I can kind of show you, I can show you that in action using our dev tools. So this is a set of dev tools that we use for debugging our applications. It has everything about like your identity, like I just mentioned, your private key, public key, and then this is Echo, our database, and the spaces that you're a part of. A space is like the unit of replication. Like if I invite you into a space, you have access to all the data within the space. I have access to all the data within the space as well. That way you don't.
So when you did the invite flow just now, you had a space and then you added the new identity, the new browser person.
Got it.
Yeah, okay,
cool. Exactly. And if I go up to this invite, you'll see that there's two members in this particular space, Jess Tester and Jess Tester 2. Yeah.
And on the left, then the
Mhm.
DevTools thing, I think
Yeah.
you actually went to like devtools.dxos or something. Is that right?
That's true. I did. What would stand out to you as strange about that, by the way?
That you are going to an external URL to look at your own data that is not replicated to it. Is that the strange thing? Did I get it right?
That is a strange thing. It is strange, right? Like, yeah, exactly. Like you can actually go into items here, and select a space. This is the one space that I'm in, and you can actually see the, there it is, take out the trash, FADSSDFA. So yeah, you're right. I went to an external domain in order to look at my own data. And that's really, I've struggled with how to explain this concept, but the way that I've been thinking about it is all of these apps are just client-side apps that are running on your client. And domains are just a URL pointer to be able to go grab some HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Right? It's like
to get you the presentation layer.
Exactly. It's like I need to load the app from somewhere. You can almost think of this as a horrible example, but you could think of this as like popping in the app CD or the floppy in order to load the app. So we went to halo.dxos.org to start the app off of the CD, and then it's looking at the local data. So all this data is actually, none of the data that you're seeing in these dev tools actually lives in that domain in any way. There's no dev tools database.
And it never transfers to that host either, right?
Never transfers to that host. It's just a client app that's being used to look at the data that's stored on the local client. And I have to get it from somewhere. So you can get it from devtools.dxos.org.
Right. Or you can run it locally if you had a copy of it.
Exactly. In fact, we have a Chrome extension. In fact, it's exactly this URL is our Chrome extension. So you can go to the Chrome extension store and then you have it locally. Now you don't have to go to a URL to get it. And it becomes one of the tabs in your Chrome inspector and all that kind of stuff. It's a nice shorthand because for clients that don't support Chrome extensions, you can just go to the URL. So for example, you could go to the URL in your Safari mobile on your iOS and use these tools to debug your local data store in mobile Safari, even though mobile Safari doesn't support Chrome extensions. So kind of nice. So what we were talking about, you asked about peer-to-peer. So it is peer-to-peer, and you can actually like go in here to debug the peer. And one of my favorite things about the way that DXOS works with peers is that it handles offline states very elegantly. And so right now, these two devices are connected. I don't know which one is, I guess this device I think is probably Moon November, because this is a text version of the private key, basically, is one way you could think of it. An auto-assigned name. So I'm going to open DevTools over here, go to the swarm, and open these two guys. It looks like the name of our connection to one another is this East Echo Early Purple, I'm guessing. No, those two are closed. You can see the little closed there. Connected. I know that's hard to see, but there's a looks like Queen Mobile. Yep. So this device on the right is Moon November. This one on the left is Queen Mobile. And so what I'm going to do is go over to our signaling. And this is basically, I'm going to tell this client to stop talking to all of DXOS peers by toggling the connection. And so immediately you saw this change to disconnected, this changed to closed. We lost connection to Moon November. So now these two devices are not connected to each other at all. So if I go back over to our tasks app, and add some stuff. Client 1, 2, pick up the yard. For some reason, yard work is really on my mind today. Edge. Way. Dude, the grass grows like crazy in the summer in North Carolina. I mean, you have to mow like every week. Not a joke. All right, so Arkansas, these two things. Yeah, it's a thing. So these the clients are disconnected, but if I go back over to DevTools now, I think this is the one that I disconnected, and I click toggle connection, watch the left. So those two tasks popped in. Notice they didn't clobber each other. It actually merged the two tasks. And that's because the way that the data structure works under the hood, there's CRDTs there to merge when necessary. But these are just hypercore feeds or event streams is what, forget the terminology there. They're just event streams. right? And so
Yeah.
each one of them was putting, I created the to-do on the event stream. And then when they came back on, those event streams merged, and each side had, notice the ordering's different though, which is kind of interesting, right? These two, pick up the yard, edge the driveway, client one to-do came in afterwards. Now I'm not doing any ordering based on time, or else it would probably reorder. Time is the hard problem in this kind of system, where you don't have a central decider of like a central time stamper. You have peer-to-peer.
Right.
The other
Yeah.
nice thing
So
about
speaking of terminology,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you.
Again.
You said CRDT.
Yes.
What is that?
Thank you. Thank you for calling that out. So the CRDT, that acronym expands into conflict-free replicated data type. But what the easier way to think about that is, if you're writing a program and you have a variable, and you want to update the contents of that variable from two different locations, usually what happens is the last writer wins, right? That's what happens for most data types in programming languages, is you have whoever is the last person to update it, that's the value of the variable, And so CRDTs is this class of data structures that computer scientists have been studying for the last 10, 15 years or so. It's fairly new, that allows for multiple writers to update the same variable or the same data structure while automatically merging their changes. So you don't have last writer wins. And there are many different CRDTs that have many different characteristics, because basically any kind of data structure, like let's say you had like a markdown file, you would need a CRDT that is tuned to merging those kinds of changes. Or if you had a JavaScript map that's just like a bunch of keys and values, you'd have a CRDT that's tuned for that kind of data structure. And the other thing is that there are trade-offs here, right? There are times where the merge can't be made intelligently, just like with Git or any of these other distributed. That's probably what programmers are most familiar with in terms of a distributed system that allows people to make changes independently and then merges them later, is Git. And Git is not a CRDT, but it has CRDT-like characteristics. If you can imagine like extending Git to every file type every data type in your programming language, that's what CRDTs is aiming to do.
Right. And as you said, sometimes the merges don't work in the same way that you have merge conflicts and Git. Yeah.
Sometimes you need human intervention, right? And also a lot of the times, last writer wins is good enough. Like, I think that's where I think early on there was so much excitement around CRDTs of like, oh, everything's going to need to be a CRDT, and like people were pushing in that direction. And it's like, you know what? In a lot of cases, you just whoever updated the last value. Like we don't need to keep the history of all changes of this value for all time. Figure out how to merge two distinct changes. It turns out that the last person who updated it, they knew what they were doing, and they wanted it to be that value, not some merged version of some other value. So last writer wins actually works often.
Cool.
But yeah, so the reason DXOS is built on top of CRDTs is because of this peer-to-peer offline nature, that these two peers could be disconnected, and it allows you to continue working on your software. One of the things that I can't show right now without disconnecting from this live stream is, and what I'll often show when I'm demoing this in person, is I'll go turn off the Wi-Fi on my machine and then continue to edit use the application. It feels responsive. Everything is still updating, all that kind of stuff. I'm able to navigate around all of that, go back online, and then see the changes immediately percolate over to other peers, which is pretty cool. So for those of you who know what CRDTs are, the particular CRDT we use in specific cases where you need one is called YJS. It's probably the most widely production used CRDT. However, CRDTs are kind of plug and play in DXOS. You could adopt a different CRDT if you wanted to for specific data types. We've just in specific cases we're using YJS right now.
And YJS, is that a JavaScript library?
It is.
That way it's
Y.js is the Y.js, and I guess I could go there. CRDT. Yeah, wonderful library. A lot of people are using it to great effect. And you'll notice that it actually some of the text editors out there that are JavaScript text editors like Prose Mirror, Quill, Code Mirror, Monaco's the thing that's under VS Code, for example. yeah, they have a YJS implementation that allows multiple editors to edit concurrently. So you get Notion-like and Google Docs-like activity in those. Sweet. So I guess the other thing to show is actually the thing that I'm most excited about for DXOS is that the database that is running the data store that's synchronizing across multiple clients isn't running once per application. It's running once per device.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is instead of the application, the database living inside of an app and the app kind of controlling the relationship to that, the user controls the database and the app asks for permissions to write to it. And then in that way, you end up having multiple applications that are able to write to the same data store. And I'll show a quick example of that. I wrote a Kanban app, and you'll notice that this one is also on a different domain, dxoskanban.netlify.app. Again, I needed a place to boot up the front end code. And now you have your to-do list represented as a Kanban. And so you can update either side and see it pop over. I can come in here, pick up the yard, was fun. And you can see updating seamlessly across. Again, these are two different apps running on two different domains on the same data store, because the data store is running once inside of this browser and then is also being replicated across peers.
Yeah, so, this is the weird, exciting thing that is hard to figure out, like hard to wrap your head around, but the Kanban app could have been written by another company that you've never talked to before. So like if you're just demoing, I wrote this app and I wrote that app, and you think, well, why didn't you put them in the same app? But if it's like, we have this sort of standard model for dealing with tasks and the user owns the tasks and there's a nice to-do list app, and then someone else knows that model and starts a new company or builds a new open source project that knows how to talk to that model, then they can represent them anyway. And whoever built the original task thing didn't need to think about that beforehand, didn't need to give permission explicitly as the app developer.
Yep.
And then again, probably for most people, it doesn't seem strange, but you went to this URL, the Kanban URL on Netlify, and even though you went there and you downloaded the code, any of these updates you're doing are not going through that URL in any way. They're not going through that host in any way. They're just peers.
Going right between peers in the network, running across this sort of backend data store. And there's a couple of things that, well, there's some interesting things that like enable that I didn't know about before I joined DXOS. And when I've talked to other developers who are like cutting edge web developers, they're often not aware. So there's a concept called a shared worker. You've probably heard of service workers. But a shared worker is a service worker that can be shared across all the tabs and windows within a single browser. And so we actually run the data store inside of a shared worker for browsers that support it. If the browser doesn't support it, then we run, the data store inside of each tab, which is kind of annoying from a performance perspective. But we have a single shared worker that all of the apps point to. And the really nice thing about that is from a performance perspective, you can open 10, 15, 20 of these DXOS apps, and they're tiny little client-side apps that are communicating over, and we iframe the shared worker into each one of the apps. That's how we do the communication to the shared worker. So it's post message across that bus, if people are familiar with that, of how you communicate with an iframe. But yeah, you have this one shared worker running per browser, and then all of these apps are just tiny little clients. Like they're views. They're not entire full stack applications, even though they operate like full stack applications. So
yeah. So workers in browsers are sort of like long-running agents, right? That you can talk to.
Yeah, it's like a process that you can fire up in the back end. Like if you think about like the background job if you're running Dropbox or Google Drive or any of those syncing systems, there's some background job that's sitting there watching your file system every time you change a file and syncing that file over to Dropbox's servers, which then sends it out to the rest of the peers. That sort of daemon, they're sometimes called, or whatever, is that long running process that's sitting there running. And so we have one of those that's managing the synchronization layer. And the nice thing is from the perspective of the developer, I'll show you the code here in a second, and we'll actually get into working on one of these things. The code ends up being very simple because you can just assume that process is running and handling all of the hard stuff for you, like synchronization across peers and like all the data, maintaining database connections, peer-to-peer, discovery of other peers, tunneling, all of that. It's like just handled for you. All you do is update the local data, like in IndexedDB, like write to it directly, and then that process handles replication, synchronization, conflict management, all that kind of stuff for you, encryption, all of that.
Cool.
So from the developer's perspective, we sometimes joke internally about what does DX in DXOS stand for, and obviously, like there's the founding idea several years ago was that it stands for decentralized, but lately we've been joking that like this thing is so nice to use for developers. Maybe DX stands for developer experience.
Yeah, well, all this stuff that you're just rattling off that you don't have to do. When I worked on Wunderlist, the task management application, I spent a good 2 years of my life working 70 hours a week trying to make this sort of stuff work for Wunderlist. And we were very proud of it. We made a great real-time sync system. It was very difficult to scale. It was very difficult to get the data updating correct and not buggy. And that's one reason that I'm excited about this. Like, no one should ever have to do that again.
Yep. I had a similar experience just early this year. I was working as a contractor for a company that wanted to build a synchronization layer across, they're building a tablet, a custom tablet, and they wanted to synchronize across tablets and devices. And I spent literally weeks doing a survey of all the available options. Here's how you could pull this off across multiple devices, multiple platforms, because it's not just the web platform. If you want to synchronize between web application, like just browsers, there's some decent solutions. They don't include all the stuff that DXOS does, like identity and all that kind of stuff. But if you just want to like send data back and forth between browsers, there's some good libraries for that. But if you want to cross platforms, if you want to handle identity, if you want to separate the data from the application layer, there's just nothing. So I spent weeks like writing this long document of like, here's my analysis of all the existing products in the market. Here's the 5 things that people are working on that are like barely out of the garage. And DXOS wasn't on that list. And so like 2 months later, I meet the DXOS team. And I'm like, what the heck, guys? Like I literally scoured the planet for this thing. And now you're showing me one and it works. It's magic.
And it's open source.
And it's open source, right? It was on GitHub the whole time. I'll show you one more.
It's my fault. It's my fault. We're 30 minutes in. We haven't seen code, so I'm going to stop talking until we do.
We're going to show. I'll show code in 2 minutes, but I want to show something that is actually a challenge for this kind of software. So when you have multiple applications writing to the same data, you have this advantage in that they're all there's no sort of API layer in the way. There's no translation. It's just you're writing directly to the data. So in Kanban land, there's a notion of apps of like a to-do that's in a doing state. That's one of the advantages of Kanban, that you don't have 2 states for an item. It's not done or not done. You can have this intermediate state. And so I can add apps that like this is being done right now. The to-do list app knows nothing about that, right? So it just shows it as an undone to-do. And I can toggle that over and it'll go back and forth between doing and done. But as soon as I started trying to model this in software, it definitely, you end up with some weird cases of like, okay, so if I create what happens if I like rename these columns and I want them and I add another one, like, do I need to keep both applications? How do you keep both applications in sync about schema changes is basically the problem. It's the schema problem. And so you're kind of trading this distributed systems problem where the way we solve this on the internet right now is GraphQL and APIs, right? Is like we enforce the schema at the API level. And without that, when you remove that, you get some amazing things like this, like rapid interop and all this kind of stuff. But you also now have to deal with the schema problem more directly. So I'd say that is an open research problem that we're working on solving. And a lot of other people who are working in this space are also working on it. So that there are trade-offs. It's not a no free lunch kind of thing.
I'm assuming the ultimate answer is the semantic web, OWL, RDF, right? Web 3, as they used to call it.
Yeah. I mean, there's Tim Berners-Lee's Solid project. There's a lot of, Tim famously, one of the pioneers of the World Wide Web, famously is frustrated with the lack of semantic information on the internet. And so he started a project called Solid that's been going on for a decade or so. But I think I would say that the answer is unclear. I think you were being cheeky, but
I was being cheeky. Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely still one of those open problems. But you're right. We should look at code. So one of the nice things, we talked about how these applications are pretty simple. So there's some boilerplate React code to be able to ship a React app, right? And so pretty standard stuff like, package JSON and Tailwind config and TS config and that kind of stuff. Make sure your bundler knows how to turn the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript into something that your app can read. But aside from the boilerplate code, this is basically the entire to-do list app. It's 140 lines, most of which is actually Tailwind and modifying the state of like the visual stuff of like JavaScript to change the status of this from editing to that kind of stuff. There's only about 15 lines of actual DXOS code in here. I mentioned that spaces are the unit of replication and that you get identity for free. So you start out by creating a key, a private key using use identity. You grab a space that is created by default with that identity, gets associated with that identity. And then you use this use query. And the way that we've kind of conceived of the API for the developer is that you query for the data that you want, and then you write to the data directly. So there's no you're not interacting with like a database object where you're saying like database write, this particular row, update this value in the database. It's just you do a query of the data store, and whatever matches that query comes back, and then you can write to those directly. So for this, the way to read this line 16 is I'm basically saying, give me all the to-dos. This to-do.filter is empty. I could do things like filter on name. I guess I could filter on the completed status, like give me just the completed to-dos. But I'm basically saying, give me all of them. And then I'm iterating over all of them in this when I'm rendering the page. And then in order to mark a task as completed, it looks just like line 64. So I just say task.completed equals, basically invert the value of the task. If it was uncompleted, mark it as completed. But it's just that you have basically a JavaScript object, and you update the value on the object, and then the SDK layer handles the reactivity of that, where it detects that as a change, synchronizes that across all the devices. The other devices also see that change come in, and they reactively update the UI. And so the UI. So one of the ways that I think about this is your UI can basically be this declarative UI that says when the data, basically just show the data in the state that it's in.
Right.
And then whenever the data changes, through the magic of React and these other functional reactive like user interface things like view, svelte, that kind of stuff, the UI updates magically for you. But you don't have to do any sort of proactive UI management. You just have a UI that reflects the state of the current data, and then we'll handle updating the state for you, and React will handle updating your UI.
So in this case, am I right that from like line 30 down, it's just a normal React code, and I could have just implemented something in memory that wasn't DXOS at all, and just like build a simple in-memory React app, and then I could swap it out and say, okay, this stuff is now in DXOS or Echo, I guess, and is getting replicated.
Yeah, no, I wish, I'm having some weird problem with like this particular thing compiling, or we could actually do that. Like we could come in and basically say to-dos is like a new to-do array. Array of to-dos. And then now we've just like rendered, now we're actually storing in memory, right? And and then pretty much everything else ends up just working because the API for updating the data is just update a JavaScript object. It's, update the fields, which is the same as you would do with yeah, it's pretty nice. Yeah, we would obviously say we would comment this out of like, I guess this is the one case where we actually, it is like interacting with the database, is when you have a new item, you do insert it into the database. And so
right,
that's
because a to-do doesn't know that it's a database object, right? It's just an object.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's saying
There
take
wouldn't
this
be a
new
way
object
for
that
it
you
to
created, and insert it into the Echo database, and now that it's inserted into the Echo database, it's now tracked. Right, and so
Right.
that's a piece that on the DXOS team we have a couple of developers who are just like really good at the framework level. I think of sort of DXOS as like being both a platform. There's like this distributed systems problem, is what I call it, of like, we got to get this data onto other people's devices. That layer is one layer, but then there's the SDK and like framework level. And the SDK framework team at DXOS has done a great job of making this really straightforward for me as a developer. So
Yeah, I can see that.
Well,
Lovely.
can I give you one more demo, and then we can I'll show you what we're hoping on building today.
I would like to see one more thing. I didn't notice where to-do came from in your code. Oh, you imported at the top, right?
Yes. That's actually a really good question. So right now, one of the areas that is definitely weakest in terms of, or one of the ways that we're not super thrilled with, is the way that we're handling types. I talked a little bit about schemas and that kind of stuff, about that's going to be the hard problem. But right now we use protobufs internally. I had never heard of protobufs before joining DXOS. So if you've never heard of this, don't worry. It's basically a format for transmitting data over the wire. It's optimized for that. There's some similar things out there. TRPC is another one that's like gaining a lot of momentum. It's even simpler than protobufs. But you define types, and I guess before I said that, you could have built this entire to-do list, by the way, without any types. You could have we have like an untyped object called an expando, and you can just grab that expando class, and now you're just dealing with a JavaScript map, no types necessary. And in that case, you can just add properties onto the object at willy-nilly. It's just a JavaScript map at that point.
Right. Yeah.
But I wanted types, because I think that's kind of where the magic is going to go with DXOS, is like, if typed data, and if I can teach different applications to read different kinds of types, I think that's where you get a lot of the power. But hypothesis.
Yeah, and I would say like these protocol buffers definitions. Protocol buffers was developed by Google, by the way, which is where a bunch of this really good real-time sync stuff got pioneered, as we all know. Yeah. But I can imagine the protocol buffers thing being a good schema definition that is then easy to externalize for standards around data types for apps to use.
Perhaps, exactly. And so I think the protobuf layer will probably be what we always use for over-the-wire communication, because that's really what it's optimized for. Is like, we need to serialize data and transmit it over the network and make sure that that data arrived uncorrupted, right, in an optimal fashion. Protobuf was built for that. And so right now we're kind of exposing our network layer interface for transmitting data all the way up at the type level. And that's why I was saying we're not thrilled with that ergonomics, with that DX. And so we're looking at some options here. One thing we do though, is we have a tool that takes your protobuf file and generates a schema, a TypeScript type for you. And so this file that I'm looking at right now is what you're actually getting imported in the to-do list, this export class, but this is entirely generated. So basically you can just write the protobuf file. And then when we actually have part of the serving the application is watching for changes to the protobuf file, generating the new schemas for TypeScript automatically, transparently behind the scenes. And then you get to import those into your TypeScript app and have all the niceness of having like typed code, but you didn't have to write the types. So eventually we'll have something like that, but we'll always have something like that. But the bottom layer probably won't be protobufs. It'll probably be something that's a little bit more familiar to developers, so they don't have to think about, why does this have =1, =2, and that kind of stuff. and then we'll translate it down into protobufs for communication over the network.
Right.
But it's an important thing to think about is like, do you actually need types? If you don't, then just use a JavaScript map and you can add and update fields on that map as you go. And if you need them, you'll have to look at, write a protobuf file that represents it. But that's definitely where the rubber meets the road, is when you start writing the schema. And that's where when I started writing the schema on the Kanban app, which is actually over here on the left, that's where things got weird, because I needed to add an additional status field that represented which column it was in.
Mm-hmm.
And now status and completed, the Boolean completed and the status are now correlated, such that if you're in this specific column, completed should be true. And so this is where like schema constraints, this is why databases are what they are, right? It's like, make sure that the data doesn't get in a really wonky state. Like that's a lot of what Postgres does for you. Well, if you're using it right. And so we're gonna have to, this is where the fun research problem is. But similarly with the Kanban app, it's also a couple hundred lines of code. I think this one might be, 160 lines of code. Very similar, very little code that's actually about updating the actual fields. And most of it is just styling the Kanban to look a certain way, and enabling things like drag and drop, which is still harder than it should be in a browser, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you think about, if you actually were to go through one of your web apps that you're working on, like I challenge you to go mark the lines where you actually change the value of a piece of data. It's really a tiny piece of your overall application logic, but then there's so many things, how you change it actually percolates into all sorts of other stuff. So state management, communicating that change via an API to the backend servers, waiting to hear back from the backend servers whether that change was successfully accepted or not. Feeding optimistically updating the UI, or showing loading states and spinners when you're waiting on the values to come back from the back end. And so, yeah, if you can just say, if you can reduce it down to, I'm just going to update the value directly, it simplifies your code tremendously. Cool. All right. One more really quick demo. So you can get, if you want to get started with DXOS, probably the easiest way is to go to Docs real quick and click Get Started. There's a quick start guide, and then there's a slightly more in-depth React tutorial. And what both of these will walk you through is actually creating a standalone DXOS app. But what we've noticed is that as we've been building DXOS apps, they end up being pretty small and very narrow focus. And you end up having all of this Chrome around the app that's basically just there to bundle React and get it, deployed on a URL and that kind of stuff. And so what our hypothesis is that it's going to be easier to actually have one location where you can see multiple of these tiny apps at the same time. And so we've been playing with an app called Composer. And what I'm going to show real quick is our Labs Composer app. So what Labs is basically you can kind of this is the in the garage experiments. So what you're going to see right now is very rough, may not work, and is very much in progress. I was making changes to this yesterday. We'll see how it works, but it kind of represents the direction that we think this shape of software is going to go. And that would be having basically a one big app that can allow you to communicate across a bunch of things. So I could write a document of pairing with Chad, day one, demo, write some code, etc. And then I can come back over here, and what we've been playing with is this idea of a stack. And with a stack, you can basically drag things, data here, but you can edit them in both places. So I can come over here, open labs, dev, and open that same document. And you'll see that, I'm not sure why it's telling me to refresh. No. Stack. All right, pairing with Chad. And in this stack, I can update the file on the fly. I
So
can
on the
also
right,
drag-
you're looking at the document, and on the left, you're looking at the stack that has the document in it, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I can drag other things in. So now I have like a stack with a bunch of documents in it. And then what we're thinking is that you'll actually be able to to grab in other file types. So you could like create a drawing. This app is the wonderful TL Draw. TL Draw.
Yeah, this is great.
I love TL Draw so much. It's a great app. I use it for diagramming a lot. It's a really great visual communication tool. But yeah, you can bring in TL Draw, and over here, you can grab that new drawing and drag it in, and now it's in the stack. One of the cool things I like about it is it updates. So if I were to like drag things, like tries to intelligently update the location as you're modifying it in the stack. And so I think one of the things this shows is this: I can represent data. You basically can present data in a way that makes sense based on the context, right? Like this is sort of like the card view of this drawing. And on the right is like the full editable thing. And it's fine to be able to probably edit a document in a card. Like that's not too hard, but like, should we have all the controls for TL Draw in a card view? Probably not. You probably just want to have like, and then you do want to keep in track though, if somebody is making changes to it, you probably do want to see those changes over time. So yeah.
Yeah, when I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, okay, there's this thing called TL Draw. You didn't have to do all this canvas stuff, and nor would you want to. But TL Draw doesn't already naturally come out of the box with any sort of DXOS knowledge or for doing the sync, right?
That's right.
So somehow you've tied in their models to the Echo database.
You got it. Yeah. So TL Draw, like you mentioned, open source component for a whiteboard. And then what we're doing is persisting the TL Draw data to Echo. And because we have that fairly straightforward sort of API for updating Echo, it was I think this was like a one-day project for one of our team members to update, to have TL Draw sit on top of Echo. And then one of the other side effects of that is that the TL Draw data for this drawing is sitting in your local database. And so if you had another way to represent that data, you could do it. So for example, this would have been a really fun thing to build. I didn't look into it enough, but we could probably look at all of the text files, the text bubbles in TL Draw and treat them as documents, such that you could be editing them using the document editor in Composer, and they would be dynamically updating on the whiteboard itself. Right, because that data just lives there in our local database that we can access from any little app that we wanted to. So that's it's pretty neat. Like that.
Next time.
Well, I think what that really demonstrates is like it takes a while to get your head around the ramifications of the shift of like separating the data from the application and associating the data with the user. And then apps request for access to the data, as opposed to the user going to the application and saying, may I have my data, please? Or may I interact with my data? You are the only way I can get to my data. If you go away, or if you go on an incredible journey, I will no longer be able to access my data. Maybe if I'm lucky and you're nice, I'll be able to export it. But we're done. Like I'm never going to be able to get to that data again because you're gone. All right, so let's, we're an hour in, almost 50 minutes in. I did have something I thought would be fun to work on today. So one of the plugins that we're working on is what we're calling our thread plugin. And it's basically just a chat interface that you would be able to use in a lot of different contexts. So be able to like write messages to each other. So one of the things that we've been noticed using Composer is that we're using a non-labs version of Composer for our knowledge management on our team. So we have a bunch of documents in there and that kind of stuff. And when we're both in a document, it's kind of helpful if we notice that we're both in the same document together. It's kind of helpful to be able to chat and with each other. And so in fact, we've been using the document itself to chat at times. Of like, if I notice that you're in the same document with me, I'll just be like, "Hey, Chad, I'm working on this section, or something like that," and the other person, "I see that. Okay." So it's like, okay, clearly we should probably have chat like as an actual for a fundamental thing. And so we're building a little chat interface that we can kind of bolt on to the rest of Composer, but we're thinking that this interface might also be used for things like comments on documents. So you could like highlight a section of a document, hit comment, and we'll just use this same plugin and the same data model, right? And so you could,
So
again,
question,
right?
question for you.
Yeah.
You're saying the word plugin. I don't think I know what that means yet.
Thank you for stopping me. Yeah, so the way that we're thinking about these different views into the data is calling it plugins right now, though. And so when I say this, we call this our Markdown editor plugin. This is our TL draw as a plugin. This is a thread plugin or a chat plugin. And we're using that term everywhere to kind of describe. We even have like a chess plugin that we're using as a tester for some of our AI bots that can play chess, of like trying to figure out how we might integrate AI into the system. But we don't really like the name chess or plugin. So if you have suggestions, I would definitely be open to hearing it. Like the problem is, right, there's the data itself, the state of the chess game. And then there's the view of the data, which right now is a chess board. But if you play chess with like an expert chess player, they can describe a chess game in text, right? They can tell you the text representation of all the pieces. That's another representation of the same data. So the plugin is the view, I guess, that knows how to access certain types of data. I don't know.
To access and to, I guess, manipulate,
modify, manipulate, yeah. So open to other words, but like Obsidian has plugins, VS Code has plugins. Like I think that's kind of where the idea originated, but I'm not yet sure that the mapping is as direct as it is in VS Code, Obsidian, that kind of thing. Alrighty, so threads. Let's look at threads and like let's do some coding. So I'm gonna open up the DXOS monorepo, check out main, and we'll check out a new branch. Jess Martin, thread to doc. Okay, so if you're tooling around DXOS stuff, you'll notice that like everything is in one giant monorepo. So we use that strategy for containing the code. I'm going to do a pnpm install here and then a run serve to load a local version of labs. And what I was thinking we might do is what I've noticed as a pattern in working with people is that we're often working in like Discord or in a chat interface, and we're having a conversation about something. This happened just last night, actually. We were working on something on our docs was not updating, and I sat there and I like found the problem, and we're doing all this in chat. And I wrote one chat message that was that basically described the problem once I had diagnosed it, and I sent it to two guys on our team, and immediately I was like, that should be a GitHub issue. Like I mean, with a few small changes, that is the body of a GitHub issue. Now I need to like copy it, go over to GitHub, find a new issue, like, okay, yeah, copy, like, and then because we're a relatively, large project, I guess there's a lot of, we use the monorepo pattern, that kind of stuff. You need to like set a couple of tags on the issue because we don't have separate repos, right? Like GitHub really is oriented around like it doesn't have great tools for monorepos. So we have to like, set these tags and all that kind of stuff. So it requires me probably 15, 20 clicks to like crank out an issue. But I've described the darn thing right there, right? Like, why can't I just say, make this into an issue? And so what I thought is a step toward that we can work on today is taking any one of these messages, clicking one button and turning it into a document. Great. So then just becomes a document with the body of it in there. And we actually have, we've written some synchronization between documents and GitHub issues and GitHub documents as well, or GitHub markdown files. So we can like wire the full trip up to GitHub issues at some point. But the first step is take it from a message, turn it into a doc. And then the next step will be make sure it syncs with a new issue in GitHub. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah. When I was at Microsoft after they acquired Wunderlist, one of the things I was trying to get people to do was adopt a new text format for creating tasks. So imagine you could do like, kind of like hashtags and @ have their place now, where hashtags or categories and @ are usually mentions. And my plan was to do hash bang, like the beginning of a script in Unix operating systems.
Yeah.
So if you do that, everything after it is a task.
Nice. Yeah.
Similar sort of pattern. That's why I mentioned it,
Yeah, and it really does help. Because I mean, this comes up all the time in working with a team, and I guess this knowledge management, how do we capture it? And a lot of it really is about friction. It's like, if you made it easy for people to use that format, they would probably adopt that format more quickly. And in fact, you probably had that in mind when you were thinking about the format. It's like, how can I make it the lowest possible friction way to get you to flag this as an actual task?
Yes.
All right, I hope this runs. Exactly. All right, so just test.
All right, so you're in the mono repo and you're in the labs directory there. You were using this PNPM thing, which is not a DXOS tool, but it's a tool for doing NPM stuff on mono repos, right?
Actually, PNPM is for using NPM on cached copies of node modules. So like NPM install is a pain, right? Like it takes forever, especially on larger projects, like a mono repo, where you might have a lot of things to grab from NPM. So node modules is going to be huge. And so what PNPM does is it caches those at your home directory. And then before going out to NPM, the server, it looks in your home directory and says, do you already have a cached copy of that? If you do, I'm just going to point to that. It also keeps the node modules file size down. If people have worked on a lot of JavaScript projects, they know that node modules can eat your freaking hard drive, depending on how many repos you have cloned locally.
Well, that's good to know. I was under the false impression that it was for mono repos, but it's actually for the problems that mono repos cause. But I should use it all the time then, probably, right?
You really should. Yeah, npm install -g pnpm, and then just use pnpm all the time.
Cool. And
yeah, it's a nice. It is definitely a nice improvement. We do have some tools that help with mono repos. So all I've done is this NX is one of like our tool set that allows you to run like a single component within our mono repo, as opposed to having to run it all. That wouldn't even make sense to run it all. So yeah, we're running the Labs app. Again, the Labs app is a leading edge clone of our Composer app. Composer app looks better, works better, is more production ready. That's actually where I do my production knowledge management. Like that's where I type documents that I want to share with the team, is in Composer in production, not in Labs. So we're working on Labs, the bleeding edge thing. And then I also ran PNPM watch in this terminal, and that just watches for changes and hopefully successfully updates the bundle. As most of us know, that is never foolproof. All right, so we're going to create a new thread. And so this should work. Hello. And you'll also notice that when I started up the local host, I had to create a new identity. And that's because my identity is tied to like a development version of Halo. So the way that private keys work in the browser is they're registered to a domain, some domain, and then they can only be used by that domain. And so the production echo, the production DXOS database runs under halo.dxos.org. And so the private key is signed to that domain. And so that the shared worker runs under that domain, halo.dxos.org. All of that's configurable. Like we don't have any like server infrastructure running at halo.dxos.org. It's merely an artifact of the way that private keys and security works in the browser, of this cross-origin domain policies and that kind of stuff, that we needed a domain that points to that private key. But in order to make all of these other apps from different domains access it, they all iframe that halo.dxos.org into their app, which then gives them like that domain access, and that helps you to cross over these weird browser security problems that you have. So,
right, and Halo is the name of your identity system.
Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, Halo is what we use as a short term for private key, public key encryption that encrypts all the data and also has each peer represented by a private key, so I can like collect a list of public keys. Like I could have your public key and then we could communicate with one another. So, all right, so we've got this little thread app. It does not do much right now. The only thing that is in moderately sophisticated that it does is it creates a group. So one of the, I think we have it like set to create a new group if it's been more than 3 minutes or something. So it does some like simple semantic grouping. So we'll have to decide whether we want to create the document with the entire group or just an individual message. But I think the first thing we should do is dive into the plugin and see if we can find this like data so that we can attach the UI to it. Like maybe figure out how we can make a hover show up when we're hovering over that. It seems like a reasonable place to start. So in the Labs app is under Packages, Apps, Labs app. And then you'll notice there's this under Source, or actually, where is it? Where are the plugins? There we go. I just open Thread. There we go.
So that's under Apps plugins.
Yeah, that's what I was going to show is that in the Labs app, they live outside of it. So for the sake of the mono repo, we put all of our plugins in a single directory. Labs loads more plugins than Composer does, Composer being our like production one. And so, but when they do load some of the same production ones. So within our plugins directory, you'll see that we have a plugin thread. You'll see we have a lot of other plugins too. The general architecture of Composer is a plugin model. Like every single thing that you see on the screen is a plugin. And so because of that, all of it's also modifiable by the developer. All right, so we've got our thread plugin in Source. We've got a set of components here. I have dug around in here a little bit, so more or less familiar with what we're looking at. One of the things, if you're just trying to maximize, not minimize.
To be clear, though, this is not a demo anymore. This is the part where we make mistakes and get confused, right? Because we're trying to do something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Welcome to blundering into coding together. and yes, for full disclosure, I did not practice this. This is like we're going to literally figure out if we can do it right now, and we may not be able to, but we'll see. So
for reference, the code base that you're looking at is this URL here, github.com/DXOS/DXOS.
Yeah. Yep. And it is a very full monorepo. So good luck finding your way down to this little thing. I guess if you search for thread, you'll find this. So I did make one change to threads yesterday, which is kind of what got me thinking about this idea, because I'm more or less familiar with this area of the code. If you're looking at a React application, right, you have to be thinking about like sort of the nesting of the components. The outside component is thread main, and this is basically the main component that's loaded, and everything else gets loaded underneath that. Then within thread main, thread channel is the next thing that gets loaded. And then a thread channel is a set of blocks, thread blocks. That was that grouping thing that I talked to you about. Like this outside square here is a thread block. And then a thread block has a series of messages in it. That isn't its own component. We just like output them. So somewhere in this thread block component, we should be able to find like a div that contains the message, and we can probably like throw a hover style, like a Tailwind hover style on it, and then see that we're like looking at the right thing. It's kind of what I'm looking for. Have you used Tailwind much, Chad?
I try to avoid anything in the front end. I worked with this wonderful guy named Bruce Williams for many years, actually, on different projects, and he's at GitHub now. we used to work on a project where we were the only 2 developers, and what I would do is I'd go and make a CSS class called Bruce Fix Me. That was just the ugliest thing I could come up with, and just apply it anywhere I did anything. So he would load the app, look at it, and just have a fit and immediately go fix all my nasty stuff.
Oh yes, the rage development of like, if I can, it's like saying something wrong on the internet in order to get to provoke the right answer.
Right.
Oh man.
So
All
no,
right,
I haven't
yeah.
used Tailwind, but I know I should, because I know it does stuff for me that I wouldn't want to do.
Yeah. So the place that I think I found it. And what I'm usually looking for when I'm in a React component is, where's the loop, right? Where is the thing that loops over the data and populates stuff on the screen? So I think I found it. We're iterating over the messages here. And so it looks like this is the outside div. So I'm going to go hover, let's see, like BG fed. I'm not getting my autocompletes from Composer. I mean, from Tailwind. Normally you get these really nice Tailwind autocompletes. Let me see. See if I can find another color in here, because colors are not named just red, yellow. They have a value associated with them in Tailwind, and I'm trying to remember. I could probably just do that. Add a border. I think, remembering that correctly. There we go.
Yeah.
Cool. So we are now highlighting a message. All right. So then what I think we want to do, this is going to be the really janky way to do it, but we could basically say, we could add an on-click handler to this entire div, or we could add a button. Let's add a button. That's probably a little bit better. Let's see, button, last name equals, let's see. I'll float it to the right, and we'll say make into doc. Let's just see if that shows up in our thing. Wow, there we go. Boom. Ugly button. I'm sure Bruce would fix that in a hurry.
Class name equals ugly button. Fix me, Bruce. Yeah.
Exactly. The story of the ugly button. All right, so we on click. Actually, I'm going to open my other. Most of coding, if you're doing it right, is actually copying from code you wrote before. And so I'm going to do that. There it is, on click. All right. So we're going to write an on click handler here. And what we would want to do is take the contents of this message, which I think is just to start writing some code. Message equals message dot. We've seen where he like puts it out to the screen. Anywhere message data.
Copilot
message
thinks
text.
it's text. Yeah.
Looks like data.
Trust the AI.
Yes, exactly. And it looks like, oh yeah. Okay, they can be data or. I agree with trust the AI. Copilot is so good. All right, so there's our message content. And what we'll do is we'll start with a simple console log message content and see if we got the right thing. So now back over to here, like close this guy and this one. All right, and then open the console. Yeah, nice.
All right.
So there's our data. And yeah, now how would we, I'm guessing we would need to, this is definitely not where we'd want to do this long term, but I'm thinking we can just import the document type and create a new one. But we'll probably want to copy that code from somewhere else. So I believe this little button does that, create document. So if we can find that button in the code base, we could probably very quickly lift that up. And let's see. Oh, I don't have my React developer tools. React developer tools are really nice, by the way. They actually allow you to navigate the component tree, like the not rendered version of it. and it's really quick to navigate to thing. We'll do create document. Oh, right, that would be in the translations file. But that actually might be helpful as well.
Create. What is that? Create document. Oh,
There we
create
go.
document
Document label.
Right. Yeah.
That's the one that we want to search for.
Meta thing for you real quick.
Sure.
You're in here modifying this labs thing, and
Yes.
if I were a normal developer, I wouldn't be hacking on the labs app necessarily, right? I might like have a shell and then import all the plugins that I want. Maybe copy the labs app. Is that the way
Yes.
you do it, or yeah?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's actually something we're working on right now, is like instructions for if you wanted to extend labs, here's how you do it. And what we'll probably do as a team is start moving labs outside of the mono repo and then treating ourselves as third-party developers so that we have this sort of same experience. But you're exactly right. Labs is just a shell around a set of plugins that you could then import. And I think are actually exported. Like you could import them via npm, like they're exported from our mono repo via npm. I'm pretty sure. I'll have to check on that. Like I'd say, like give us a week or two, and we'll have a much better answer to that question and a much better like here's how you could get started with labs kind of thing. But for right now, you could just clone our mono repo and hack on labs directly. There's no reason not to do that. If you do end up doing that, by the way, there's a single file at the root of the repo called repository guide that is actually good and will help you get like the repository up and running. And it also has a list of all these like really helpful commands that you can run inside the repository to like just like the mono repo stuff of like, I just want to run labs app. How do I do that? I just want to run composer or whatever. And so the repository guide is very helpful. That's actually up to date. That's what I use to get myself up and going.
Cool.
Let's see. So it looks like we're sending this space action add object to, yeah, this may not be the best place to get it. Space plugin. Oh, space plugin create document. That's a test ID though. I think we're using Storybook in a lot of places. So I think that might be related to Storybook. Not exactly sure. Not something I've used much. So interesting, when you click the create document button, you get, oh, interesting. So this is actually something cool to point out about the plugins API. The file that we're in right now is the root file for the Markdown document plugin. So this is the Markdown document plugin we were talking about over here.
Yeah.
And so instead of having this tree, this is what this like thing on the left we call the tree view for obvious reasons, right? It's a tree view of the data. Instead of having this button be the control of this button be controlled by the tree view plugin, we have the Markdown plugin say, I know what you should do with that plus. So basically, like you allowing plugins to inject behavior into other parts of Composer. And this is one of the things that makes Composer so magically hackable. And if you go into any one of these, like the plugin, the top level plugin TSX files for one of our plugins, you'll see a not final API for doing this sort of embedding into other parts of the system. And that's where this provides array comes from. So it provides like translations, which is like the different labels. And then this graph thing is something that we're actively working on right now of how do plugins tell the general UI about actions that they want to be able to, that they should be able to take because they're loaded. So if you, for an interesting example here, right? If you started Composer without the Markdown plugin, that plus button wouldn't be there. Even though you never edited the tree view plugin. It's because that thing is provided by the Markdown plugin. So kind of an interesting architectural choice. And I think that's the nice thing too about as you're writing plugins for this is all of the third-party plugins will have that kind of capability as well of like injecting behavior into other parts of the application.
But as a result, it means that the creation of the document is magic and not in this file that we're looking at, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's what I'm obfuscating. means that the code that I wanted is not right here. It's somewhere else. It looks like it's probably in markdown action.create. So let's go see if we can find that. Markdown action create, maybe. Can I preserve capitalization? How do I do that? No results. Okay. Let's see. These are GitHub exports. 47 composer model.
Yeah, this is the GitHub plugin that you're looking at. Okay.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yep,
That's
I
probably
moved.
not what you want.
Yeah, let's actually browse the tree then. So in the Markdown plugin here, it's definitely coming to this Markdown. Oops. There we go. Those are all in this file, right? Oh, there we go. Object new document type. What's a document type? Oh. There we go. Document as document type from brainframe types. Let me see if I can just import that directly.
And brainframe is a reference to the previous name of the company or existing name of the company.
Or,
the brainframe, if you see it, is DXOS essentially.
Yeah, or composer, or like it's sort of this. Yeah, it's the platform. You're what you said is technically correct, but it's often used in the repository to refer to the thing that was composer has become.
Right. The super application.
The super application, exactly. All right, so we had our on-click, which was in thread block. Where's our console? There it is. Okay,
Yeah.
so we should be able to. Oh, right, I copied the import. So there's the import. Is it going to let me get? Oh, it's going to tell me that I need to use the same
import line.
Yeah, it's kind of a little aggressive on the linting. I'm also having these like delays in VS Code right now. Like right now, it's totally hung. Okay, we're back.
The AI is thinking. That's why.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a small price to pay, Jess.
The AI is tired. Let me have a break.
You know, that AI has been working really hard over the last several
It
months.
has, especially on my computer.
All right, so you're going to instantiate one of those things, which
and
has
totally
a weird
making
name. Like
I'm going to go
document
back
type
to
is kind of a weird name for it, but you're just doing that to avoid clashing with document in the browser, I assume.
I maybe.
I bet.
I don't even know.
Bet.
I'm
going to go with that. That's what it is.
Yeah. You know what? We're going to have to do a space add.
Yes.
We would need to do that is the next thing we would need to do, but we need access to the space. And so I ran into this just the other day too. This is interesting. I wonder if this is smart enough to know what a document type contains. Anyway, so I ran into this the other day. We're down inside a thread block, and a thread block is a fairly, I think appropriately so, is a fairly dumb component that doesn't know anything about spaces. It knows how to take a set of messages and a block of messages and render them to the screen. And it doesn't know about the fact that it's inside of DXOS and that there's a space wrapping all of this and that there's a database that I can access. And so doing this in here is not going, like, it's going to break the encapsulation. And I don't think, I'm sure there's a way that I could grab the spaces plugin directly, or the spaces object directly in this thing. But the right way to do this is actually to pass props up to the place that knows about spaces, which I'm pretty sure is thread main. Yeah, there's the space proxy from Echo, and this guy uses space proxy here. Close that. And so in this, I think we could pass in a like add document function that could then could get called down inside of that other thing. Honestly, this is one of the things that drives me crazy about React, because in order to do this, we're going to have to pass the function from thread main into thread channel, and from thread channel into thread block. Or was it thread block that was next? Yeah. And then we can call it. And so we're going to have to change the props all the way down the chain in order to like preserve encapsulation, which feels like it breaks encapsulation, right? Like the fact that I have to like pass this thing into props, and now thread block has to know about, I don't know. It
Can you not
feels
just
ugly.
pass the props all the way through? I don't even know what I'm talking about.
No, you have to, you actually, I guess there would be workarounds around it where you could just like pass an arbitrary props array. But if you want to have prop types, if you want to use typing and make sure that you have type safety around this component has access to these, this data and that kind of stuff, then you have to pass it all the way down. So what that would look like here would be like on add document equals handle add document, and then we would need to write a function up here. Whoops. It's like const handle add document, and we'll need to pass in the space. I was just noticing that it's not actually passed in to the component, and then we do like space.db.add, and then actually, I guess we could do the import of document at this level.
Yeah, and then instantiate the document.
Mm-hmm. This may yet work. We've got 6 minutes here. Oh, except AI tired again. AI tired.
Because it's going to make up for this transgression. Once it wakes up, it's going to be so fast. See?
There you go.
It heard you.
Oh, AI tired again. Come on. It's funny though. This is a brand new Mac Studio, like M2 Max, and I don't know what's happening. I don't know why. Oh goodness. All right, so there we go. So then yeah, there we go. Good for you, AI. Yeah.
Good job. Thank you.
Yeah, it's probably wrong, but we'll go with it.
Is content even the right thing? Doesn't look like
string
it.
is not assignable to text. What? Wow.
Is
capital
text
T
some
text.
sort of encoding aware thing? Maybe.
Oh, probably so. Well, we're just going to set the title because that alone would be pretty awesome.
That'll be good.
And we've got handle add document. All right, so now we've got to pass it all the way down. So we go to thread channel first, and we tell thread channel, where's the top of thread channel? Here it is. We're going to add another one of these called on add document. It's going to take a text string and return, sure, Boolean undefined, maybe, I don't know. On add document. And then when we instantiate the thread block, we have to pass that in as well on add document. See how this feels so boilerplatey? It just feels wrong. I mean, I'm sure that I'm doing it wrong because I am not an expert React developer, but I often feel like I'm doing something wrong when I'm even doing canonical React.
And you know, Jess, you're not trying to do anything wrong, so I think we have to blame React and not you, right?
That's right. Yeah, the
you're well intentioned here,
right? The grain of the system is forcing me to do whatever it is that I'm doing,
or at least it's not helping you not do it.
Yeah. On add
harder.
document message. We said message text. Yeah, that seems reasonable. Cannot invoke an object, which is possibly undefined. It's I'm going to say it's not possibly undefined there.
There you go.
Remove the question mark. Okay, and then that's a linting error, so we can fix that. I'm looking at the red tabs up here at the top. On add document. I specified it in thread channel, I think. Did I mistype it or type it something
You have
different?
you also have to return a value, I guess, from handle add document. It was giving a
Ooh,
type
yeah,
error.
Boolean or undefined. Yep. Maybe that's right. Yeah, maybe our function here. Oh, I didn't define a return type.
Space.db.add, I think, doesn't return. It probably returns undefined, right? There you
True
go.
always. Let's see if that helps us out. I don't see any red up here. All right, let's see what happens.
That's going to work.
This would be magical. There we go. New thread. I'm going to refresh the thing just for good luck. All right, making the doc. Looking for console here and
Looking for the error.
yeah, exactly. Did we get a new one? Okay, I've got 2. New document, and this should work. Wait, yeah, this should work. That's the name of it.
Oh,
Holy
yeah,
smokes.
hit the other ones. Hit the other ones. Let's see. I don't believe
click
it.
click all of them. Click
all
of
of them.
them. Yeah. Making the doc, making the doc, making the doc. And there we go.
Yes.
Woo!
All right. Amazing.
So yeah, now we could have like a reasonable message about something we actually wanted to make into a document, and you can just elevate it to the level of a document, immediately come in and like issue 1. All right. Hey man, with 2 minutes to spare.
Super cool. So let's say we get back together, we could then look at the GitHub plugin thing that you have already and try to tie them together and create an issue, right?
Yeah, that would be ideal. What I think the picture, and I'm gonna see if I can stop my screen share. Here we go. Boop. Yeah, the idea that Rich and I, who've been mainly working on the labs piece, have is sort of this idea that task management and knowledge management are often disconnected from one another, and yet they're so related. Of like, and so what if you could kind of start with this sort of ephemeral idea, like we're just talking in a chat room with one another, and then evolve that into now it's some tasks that I'm going to do, and then have that eventually become documentation that lives in our system, so that you don't have these sort of isolated systems where you have GitHub issues over here, Notion over here, Discord over here, and that kind of stuff. What if we could do all of that? Sort of this sort of like evolutionary thing where something can grow over time from a chat message to a document to maybe to an item in the stack to a document to a GitHub issue, and then eventually, I don't know, we'll see. But yeah, we could get back together and try that. And yeah, that was fun.
It was. Thank you.
You're welcome.